The sun rose gently over the American Midwest, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. A cool mist clung to the wooden fences, and the distant hum of a tractor drifted across the sleepy streets. This was a town where everyone knew each other's names, where gossip traveled faster than the wind, and where routine was both a comfort and a curse dot at the heart of Maine. Street stood a modest bakery with a glowing red sign, Sweet Temptations. Every morning, its doors opened before dawn, filling the air with the smell of freshly baked bread, cinnamon, and coffee. The townspeople loved this bakery, not just for its pastries, but for the man who ran it, Steve Parker. Steve was 32, a man of quiet strength, with brown hair that curled at the edges and a faint stubble that hinted at sleepless nights. To outsiders, he seemed like the perfect picture of small-town simplicity. Yet behind his polite smile lived a loneliness that not even the warmest bread could soften. Inside the bakery's kitchen, the world outside seemed to vanish. The room was alive with warmth, the clatter of pans, the rhythm of kneading dough, the golden beams of sunlight spilling through the window. Steve moved with precision, pressing and folding, letting his hands carry the memory of his father, who had once taught him this craft. Flour dust floated in the air like tiny stars. The counter bore years of marks, scars from knives and rolling. Pins, each one telling its own silent story. Baking was more than a livelihood for Steve. It was his way of fighting emptiness. Yet, as he wiped sweat from his brow and glanced at the empty chair in the corner, a chair once reserved for someone he loved, his chest tightened. Bread filled the stomach, but it could not fill the void in his heart. When the bakery closed and silence claimed the streets, Steve returned to his apartment, a small, dimly lit space above the bakery. The apartment smelled faintly of old wood and coffee grounds. It was neat, almost too neat, as if order was his shield against the chaos of solitude. He sat at a small kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up an old photograph. The picture showed him with a woman, smiling brightly, her arm looped through his. That woman was gone now, and with her departure, so too had gone his faith in love. Outside, neon lights flickered, throwing shades of blue and orange across the wall. Steve stared through the window, lost in thought. He wondered if life would always feel this heavy, if the bakery would always be the only place where he felt alive. The next morning, as Steve arranged loaves on the wooden shelves, the bell above, the bakery door chimed. A woman stepped inside, and in that moment, something shifted. She was tall, graceful, and carried herself with an authority that silenced the room. Madame Kimberly, an African-American woman in her 60s, had silver, braids that cascaded over her shoulders. Her robe, woven with bright colors and patterns, seemed to belong to another world. The wooden door creaked shut behind her as she walked slowly to the counter. Steve, taken aback, wiped his flour-covered hands on his apron and forced a polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am," he said softly. Her eyes, deep and knowing, met his. She didn't order bread. She simply studied him for a long moment, as if she could see beyond his skin and into the burdens he carried. Finally, Madame Kimberly spoke. Her voice was low and melodic, carrying the weight of wisdom. "You've been carrying more than just flour, child," she whispered. From her bag, she drew a small pouch tied with a red string. Placing it gently in Steve's flour-dusted hands, she leaned closer. "Steep these herbs in hot water. Drink. You will see your life change." Steve blinked, confused. "What is this?" "A gift," she said simply. "But gifts come with choices, and choices have consequences." Before Steve could ask more, she smiled, turned, and walked toward the door. The bell rang once more as she disappeared into the morning light, leaving him with nothing but the faint scent of her perfume. and the mysterious pouch. That afternoon, business carried on as usual. Customers came and went, buying bread, muffins, and pies. But when the door opened again, Steve felt something strange. A woman entered, blonde, mid-30s, dressed in jeans and a casual sweater. She was pregnant, her belly showing clearly under her clothes. She smiled too brightly, her eyes lingering on Steve longer than they should have dot as she handed him money for her loaf of bread. She leaned too close, close enough that Steve caught the faint scent of her perfume mixed with something else he couldn't name. Her smile was odd, almost knowing, as though she shared a secret with him. Steve cleared his throat and stepped back. "Thank you. Have a good day." The woman left, but the unease remained. Steve rubbed his hands on his apron, wondering why the air suddenly felt heavier. Days passed, and the bakery returned to its rhythm, until she arrived. The bell rang. Again, but this time, the sound carried weight. A woman stepped in, and the room seemed to grow warmer. She was striking Lara, 34, Latina, with flowing black hair and a red trench coat that shimmered under the bakery lights. Diamond earrings sparkled as she tilted her head, scanning the room before resting her gaze on Steve. "You must be Steve," she said, her voice smooth as silk. Steve froze. The way she spoke his name felt as though she already knew him. For the first time in years, Steve felt his pulse quicken. Something about Lara's presence was magnetic, dangerous, and undeniable. He didn't know it then, but with her arrival, his life was about to unravel in ways he could never have imagined. The bakery had always been a safe place for Steve. Warm ovens, fresh bread, familiar faces. But with Lara, the air felt different. She leaned across the counter, her lips curving into a knowing smile. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, studied him as if peeling back his defenses layer by layer. "So modest," she whispered. "But I hear you're the reason people keep coming back." Steve swallowed hard, pretending to focus on arranging loaves. "I think it's the bread, not me." Her smile deepened. She lowered her voice, just enough for him to hear. "You work so hard, Steve. Don't you think you deserve someone who knows how to appreciate you?" Her words hung in the air like smoke, thick and impossible to ignore. Steve felt heat rising in his chest, not from the ovens, but from something far more dangerous. That night, the rain poured hard against the streets. Steve had just locked the bakery when he heard a knock at his apartment door upstairs. He opened it to see Adriana, an African-American woman in her mid-30s, heavily pregnant. Her jacket clung to her skin, soaked from the rain. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes wide with desperation. "Please." "Steve," she whispered. "I need you." Steve stepped back, startled. "Do you need a doctor? Should I call someone?" She shook her head violently, her wet hair clinging to her face. "No, not a doctor. You. They said you could help me." Her words unsettled him. Before he could respond, she placed her trembling hand on his chest, her eyes pleading. Steve's throat went dry. Something was happening, something he didn't understand, but couldn't seem to stop. Days later, Steve found himself standing outside Lara's apartment. She had invited him under the pretense of discussing a catering job. But when the door opened, Steve instantly knew this was no business meeting. The lights were low, candles flickering across polished wooden shelves. Soft jazz played in the background, a kind that carried both elegance and danger. Lara, dressed in a sleek dress, held 2 glasses of wine. "You've been working so hard," she said smoothly, handing him a glass. "Let someone take care of you for once." Steve hesitated, his fingers brushing the stem of the glass. His conscience screamed against it, but Lara's eyes pulled him in like a tide he could not resist out as the night deepened, the line between Right and wrong blurred. By the time Steve left, he carried not just the weight of guilt, but also an envelope filled with money. Payment he never asked for, but could not bring himself to refuse. It didn't end there. Steve began seeing Lara more often, sometimes in the bakery, sometimes in shadowed corners of town. One night, they met in a rain-slick alleyway. Neon lights reflected off the wet pavement, giving the scene a surreal glow. Lara, in her red trench coat, leaned close, her words sharp and deliberate. "Do you know what they're saying about you?" she teased. Steve shook his head. "I don't care what they say." "I'm not," she cut him off, pressing a finger to his lips. "Let them whisper. You and I know the truth." But Steve did care. Every glance, every laugh behind his back, every knowing look from the women in town. It ate at him. What had once been a bakery filled with simple joy was now a stage for rumors, temptation, and danger. Inside the local tavern, men gathered around a wooden table, their voices low and bitter. "My wife spends more time at that bakery than at home," one man growled. "Mine too," another added, slamming his drink down. "She says she craves his bread, but I know there's more to it." The men exchanged suspicious glances, their faces hardening. From the corner of the tavern, someone muttered, "They say Steve has a gift, something unnatural." The room grew tense. In a small town, whispers were more dangerous than weapons. And tonight, those whispers turned into fire. The next morning, Steve barely had time to set loaves on display before the door burst open. A man stormed in, broad shoulders, flannel shirt, rage burning in his eyes. It was Oben, known in town for his temper. He slammed his fists against the counter, rattling the jars. "What have you done to my wife?" he demanded. Steve froze, his hands trembling. I don't know what you're talking about. I only sell bread. Don't lie to me," Oben roared. His voice carried into the street, drawing a small crowd outside. Soon more men joined, their eyes filled with fury. One shouted, "My wife, too. She talks in her sleep, says your name." Another added, "You bewitched them, didn't you?" The bakery, once a haven, now felt like a cage. Steve's breath quickened. He could see the hatred in their eyes, and for the first time, he feared what might come next. Before the men could drag him out, the sound of voices rose from outside. A group of pregnant women, Latina, African American, Caucasian, pushed through the crowd. Their eyes blazed with defiance as they formed a protective circle around Steve. "Leave him alone," one shouted. "He's done nothing wrong," cried another. The husbands roared back, their anger twisting into something darker. To them, the women's defense was proof enough. Proof that Steve had stolen their loyalty, their love, their homes. The square buzzed with chaos. Angry men, defiant women, Steve trapped in the center, his heart pounding like a drum. For the first time, he realized he was no longer in control. The gift, the temptation, the whispers, everything had spiraled beyond his grasp. The bakery had grown quiet. The same walls that once echoed with laughter and conversation now felt haunted by whispers and suspicion. Steve stood behind the counter, hands pressed against the wood, his chest heavy with dread. The door creaked. Open. And there she was again, Madame Kimberly. Her silver braids shimmered in the lantern light, her colorful robe flowing around her like ripples on water. She didn't smile this time. Her eyes, dark and serious, cut straight into Steve's. "I warned you," she said, her voice low but firm. "The herbs I gave you were not meant for indulgence. You've awakened something in yourself, and now the balance has been broken." Steve stepped forward, desperation in his voice. "I didn't ask for this. They came to me. I never wanted." This chaos, Kimberly raised her hand, silencing him. Every choice carries weight, Steve, and you chose to feed your pride instead of your soul. The gift became a curse because you let temptation lead you. Steve's throat tightened. What do I do? Tell me how to stop this. She looked at him long and hard, then spoke. You must be willing to lose everything, or you will lose yourself. The room fell silent. The air seemed heavier, as if even the walls were listening. Kimberly turned and walked into the night, leaving Steve trembling in the shadows of his own bakery. The town's anger could not be contained. One evening, as Steve tried to close the bakery, he was dragged into the street by furious husbands. Their voices rose like thunder in the square. You bewitched our women. You turned them against us. You've poisoned our town. Steve begged, I never forced anyone. They came of their own choice. But the elders of the town stood at the edge of the crowd, their faces grim. After a hasty trial, filled with shouts, accusations, and fear, the verdict was declared. Steve Parker was to be exiled, with nothing but a small duffel bag and the clothes on his back. Steve walked down the lonely highway at dusk. Behind him, the faint glow of the Sweet Temptation sign flickered in the distance. Ahead of him stretched miles of empty road. Every step felt like a stone in his chest. The bakery was gone, the trust of the town shattered. What had once been? His pride was now just a memory fading into the horizon. Steve wandered until his feet blistered, eventually finding himself in another small town. It wasn't much different from the one he left. Wooden barns, wide fields, the smell of soil after rain. Here he found work on a farm. His hands, once skilled at kneading dough, now blistered from pulling weeds and lifting hay bales. His shirt clung to his sweat, his muscles ached, but he welcomed the pain. The farm didn't ask questions about his past. It gave him shelter, food, and work. In the fields, under the wide Midwestern sky, Steve felt a strange kind of peace, but also a gnawing emptiness. Even here, whispers of his old life seemed to follow. Now and then, a pregnant woman would glance at him too long, or smile in a way that felt familiar. Steve would turn away, his heart pounding. He had learned his lesson, and he feared what would happen if he ever slipped again. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Steve walked to the river that cut through the countryside. The sunset painted the water gold, and the tall grass swayed gently in the breeze. Steve sat on the bank, the pouch of herbs Kimberly had once given him still in his pocket. He turned it over in his hands, staring at the reflection of his weary face in the rippling water. I want to make things right, he whispered to the empty air. I don't want this curse anymore. For the first time in months, he let himself cry, quietly, like a man who had carried too much for too long. The night of the full moon arrived. The sky above the farm glowed deep blue, stars burning. Bright against the velvet darkness, Steve walked into the fields with the pouch in hand. He brewed the herbs into tea, the steam curling into the cold air. His hands trembled as he lifted the rustic cup to his lips. Madame Kimberly's voice echoed in his memory. It will suppress your gift, but only if your heart is truly repentant. Steve closed his eyes, whispered a prayer he didn't know he still remembered, and drank. The tea was bitter, earthy, but as it flowed through him, he felt something shifting, a release, a weight lifting from his chest. For the first time in years, his body felt ordinary. The strange pull, the dangerous allure, gone. He sank to his knees, staring at the glowing moon above, his heart both heavy and free. Weeks later, Steve found himself back where he had always belonged, in a bakery. Not the old one, but a new shop in this small town. The ovens glowed warmly. Sunlight poured through the windows, and flour dust danced in the air. The counter was once again lined with bread, pies, and cakes, symbols of a simpler life. Time. There were no secrets, no whispers, no strange cravings from those who came in. Just townsfolk smiling, children pressing noses against the glass, and neighbors eager to taste his work. Steve smiled too, a smile that felt lighter than it had in years. He wasn't the man with the gift anymore. He was simply Steve Parker, the baker. And that was enough. As the bell above the door chimed and laughter filled the shop, Steve realized something important. Peace didn't come from magic or from others' attention. It came from choosing the simple, honest path, even when it was the hardest one to walk. And so, under the golden morning light of a quiet American town, Steve finally found what he had been searching for all along.